This is a Red FM Vancouver podcast. Make sure you hit subscribe for more great content. For further info, log on to redfm.ca.
ਗ੍ਰੀਨ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੰਟਰਮ ਲੀਡਰ ਨੇ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਐਡਮ ਓਲਸਨ ਉਹ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਨਗੇ। ਗ੍ਰੀਨ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੀ ਥੰਮੀ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਹੀ BC ਦੀ ਇਹ NDP ਸਰਕਾਰ ਖੜੀ ਸੀ ਔਰ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਤੇ ਸਿਆਣੀ ਦੂਰਅੰਦੇਸ਼ੀ ਵਾਲੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਐਂਡਰੂ ਵੀਵਰ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਾਥੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਕਿ ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਕੰਟਰੈਕਟ ਲਿਖ ਲਿਆ। ਉਸ ਕੰਟਰੈਕਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲਿਖ ਲਿਆ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਸਥਿਰ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਦੇਣੀ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ BC ਦੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ। ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਡਾ ਸਹਾਰਾ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਹੁਣ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮਿਨੋਰਿਟੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਬਣਾ ਲਓ ਔਰ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਪਿੱਛੋਂ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਕਾਲ ਕਰ ਦਿਓ ਤੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਤੇ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦਾ ਫਿਰ ਬੋਝ ਪੈ ਜਾਏ। ਗ੍ਰੀਨ ਪਾਰਟੀ ਦੀ ਕੀ ਪੋਜੀਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਬਾਰੇ? ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਸੁਣ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਸਨੈਪ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਅਕਤੂਬਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ BC ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ NDP ਸਰਕਾਰ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਕਰਵਾ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ ਔਰ ਉਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਕਈ ਸੰਕੇਤ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਮਿਲੇ ਨੇ। ਲੇਟਲੀ ਹੁਣ BC ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੀਮੀਅਰ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਹੌਰਗਨ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਹਿ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਉਦੋਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਸਨ, COVID-19 ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਸਨ ਜਦੋਂ ਕੰਟਰੈਕਟ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਸੀ। ਹੁਣ COVID-19 ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਬਦਲ ਗਈਆਂ ਨੇ। ਹੁਣ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਪੈਂਡੈਮਿਕ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਕੋਵਿਡ ਦਾ ਨਾਂ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ। ਸੋ ਉਹ ਹੁਣ ਬੇਸਿਕਲੀ ਉਹ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਸਨ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਸਮਝੌਤਾ ਲਾਗੂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦਾ। ਲੇਕਿਨ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਹੁਣ ਦੇ ਇੰਟਰਮ ਲੀਡਰ ਨੇ ਐਡਮ ਓਲਸਨ ਉਹ ਕੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ? ਮਿਸਟਰ ਓਲਸਨ, ਗੁੱਡ ਮਾਰਨਿੰਗ।
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for having me, Harjinder.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time. And we want to know that we are all hearing these kind of rumors from Victoria that there can be a election here in October, and there are all kind of indications coming in from BC election BC, and even Premier has mentioned that the previous agreement that you guys wrote with him doesn't mean anything anymore because now it's a pandemic year, pandemic months going through. So what do you think about that promise and that the promise was made when you given your support?
Well, I mean, I think that it's important. It's important first to acknowledge the fact that probably there is a very, very small group of people that are thinking about an election right now. Clearly, it's not been something that Premier Horgan has decided that he's going to dismiss. He could have dismissed this. It's been speculated on for weeks. Last couple of months, he could have dismissed it, and we could have gotten to the business of focusing in solely on the pandemic. He's chosen not to for some reason. Most British Columbians that I've talked to, most British Columbians that I've heard from, are very concerned about the next number of weeks. We are about to send hundreds of thousands of kids back into school, and it's not responsible, nor is it appropriate for us to have hanging over our head at the same time the threat of an election. Also, I think it's important to point out that the contract or the agreement that we, the BC Green Caucus and the BC NDP Caucus signed, was signed by every single member, including the NDP members, all NDP members and all BC Green members of the legislature.
So that agreement is signed by all those MLAs of NDP?
Correct. This was not an agreement between leaders. This was an agreement between all the elected members. There's actually 45 signatories to that because the mayor of Nanaimo stepped down and a new member for Nanaimo came in. So 45 members of the legislature signed that agreement. This is not a leaders agreement or a gentleman's agreement, a handshake.
But when Mr. Horgan said that, Mr. Olsen, that there's no word of a pandemic in that agreement. That agreement, as a matter of fact, what he's implying was that this doesn't mean anything because now there's a pandemic. Because of the coronavirus, because of the COVID-19, he has kind of make this contract insignificant. Are you disturbed by that?
Well, I would say there's lots of things that are not in the confidence and supply agreement that we've worked with the BC NDP on for the last 3 years. The confidence and supply agreement is not inclusive of every issue of every thing that could have been thought of or even things that weren't thought of back in 2017. What's important to understand about the confidence and supply agreement, there was certainly issues that we found common ground on that we highlighted that we were going to work on. And this was the foundation of the working agreement between the BC NDP and the BC Greens. What's most important, though, about that agreement is that it is the agreement that, in fact, put Mr. Horgan into the position that he's in today as Premier. He was not Premier at the end of the last election. Christy Clark was. And the confidence and supply agreement that apparently, as it's characterized here, is meaningless it's very meaningful because it is the exact agreement that put Mr. Horgan in as the office of Premier, that put Carol James in as the office of the Finance Minister, and all of the other 20 cabinet ministers have their job today because of the confidence and supply agreement.
No, I agree with you that your support has made him the Premier of BC, but at the same time, does this supply agreement clearly says that the NDP would not call an election in the middle? It would not call the election before the next fixed date of 2021. Does it clearly say in it?
Yes, it does. It is a commitment that the only way that this government will fall is by a non-confidence vote, and that has not happened. In fact, the most recent budget was passed this summer with all members of the House passing it unanimously, which is one of the first times that this has happened. I think so. I think you see members from all three parties voting to support the budget. Clearly, there is not a lack of confidence in the House, which is the only way that under our agreement that we should be going to an early election.
Well, we all understand that you're an interim leader, but in few days there can be a new leader. Would they uphold your stance in this issue?
Well, those are conversations. I mean, I think this is an interesting timing, isn't it? I've got a couple of days left as the interim leader. We've got a new leader coming in. We'll be having those meetings early next week. This is interesting timing, I think, for me as we go through that transition. I think it's important that our party does go through that transition. I'm not going to speak for the new leader at this point. I'm doing my best to try to speak as little as possible as the party sorts out it's in my final days as interim leader. I will continue to repeat what I've been repeating as the interim leader for the past number of months, though, and that is that we've had a very productive, if not the most productive, minority government. Mr. Horgan has benefited from the support of the third party, of the BC Greens, in governing this province. We've been, widely acclaimed for the initial stages of the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We've done a lot of really progressive and powerful policy moves over the past 3 years, and that work needs to continue, and it needs to continue to the next scheduled election in October of 2021.
But all the signatories of that supply agreement from the Green Party are still sitting MLAs of this legislature. They're all in good standing, are they?
Correct. Yes, we are. All of the signatories to the confidence and supply agreement are still elected members of the legislature. They are people that maybe many of your listeners put their trust and their faith in. Mm-hmm. We put our name down on that agreement, that we were going to follow and abide by it, that there was going to be good faith and no surprises. All of the members of that agreement are still sitting.
Tell my listeners, why do you think that it won't be wise for us to have a provincial election at this time?
Well, I think it's pretty clear. As hundreds of thousands of children return to school, I can tell you, nobody has reached out to my office in the last number of weeks complaining to me about the dysfunction of the government, because the government hasn't been dysfunctional. But British Columbians have been reaching out to my office concerned about the return.
As a matter of fact, this government is doing very well.
Yes, I would agree with that we've done quite well. I would say that what most people are concerned about is...
So if it's working very well, then why election now?
Well, I mean, I think that this is where governance and politics collide, frankly, sir. I think that this is where I think, high polling numbers entice politicians to do things that probably are not in their best interest in the long run. I think what's important is that we focus on getting our kids back to school, making sure that our teachers are working in a safe environment, making sure that bus drivers and support staff are there for our children, making sure that if there is an outbreak that we're able to deal with it. That's where the politicians need to be focused. That's where our work needs to be focused on, not contemplating an unnecessary election that puts partisan interests ahead of and personal interests, political interests ahead of the interests of British Columbians. British Columbians have very, very little patience for politicians who think about themselves and think about their futures. And I would suggest that's what's happening here. And I think that there's an opportunity now to shift that thinking and to start putting the interests of British Columbians first.
Mr. Olsen, I really appreciate you putting your bold and honest opinion forward. Thank you.
Thank you for having me this morning.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to another Red FM podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe and check out our Red FM Canada YouTube channel. For further info, log on to our Red FM social media platforms or visit redfm.ca.